So I'm betting I can show you how I do my realistic ears in a few minutes with 3 pencils. So the main techniques I use for all of my ears, so these are rough sketches. Each of these has taken about 2 or 3 minutes each. When I'm drawing an ear for 2 or 3 hours, it's the same approach. I'm just using more colours and I'm just going slightly slower in the later stages. In the initial stages, I really do encourage you to actually go quite quickly, because it brings in an element of randomness that I think is missing in some pet portraits that I see. I think when we're starting out, we're very, very precise about the lines that we sort of pop on. We're doing them very carefully. We're thinking about exactly how we're doing things. And then I think as you move forward with your artwork, what you realize is actually, well, we don't want those straight and parallel lines. What we want to do is have a pencil on a paper and then flick and have that kind of tapered edge. So we progress to that. And then I think one of the keys to realism then is realizing that, yes, you can go in the same general direction. So all of that fur is sort of pushing up and over the paper, but it's got some movement and some life to it. So we want to move away from parallel lines. We want to move towards something with a bit more life in it. And one way of training yourself to do this a bit more is to do it really quickly. So to practice actually sketching things quite a speed. And I think bringing in 3 pencils on a toned paper is actually a really great start to sketching. So let me show you how that would work. So give myself a little bit more room here. So I'm going to do a really quick outline of what this ear might look like. And you see I've sketched it a few times on this paper now. So I've got a little bit of a head start on the shape of this ear. I've done a little bit of practice on here, but it really essentially it's a little bit of a triangle, and then there's a bit of a fold in the ear in here as well. So it's quite a fluffy cat ear. So the first thing I wanted to do was pop in with my mid-tone. So I'm using 3 pencils. I'm using this Mars Violet as an initial layer, and then I'm going darker with a black, and I'm going lighter with a white. And I think restricting your palette to 3 pencils really helps with understanding values and interpreting the reference photo, and just focusing on the order in which we do things, maintaining those highlights, bringing realism in quite quickly. So the first thing I've done is rough shape with this Mars Violet, and obviously you could do that with a line art if you wanted to, so you don't have to freehand it. And then the next thing I'm going to do is pop in some of those highlights. And on this cat, got grey fur, and looks almost white in this light. So I'm just flicking in some of that white fur at the moment. So at this point, I'm actually drawing the individual strands of fur. I'll pop those in. And you can see I'm going in lots of different directions here. So I've just got a rough initial layer down there. So that's the long furry bit in the middle of that ear there. And then the next thing is the fur sort of coming up the side here. And then this fur, I'm suggesting it looks more like it's going sort of on one side and around, and then on the other side it's going in the opposite direction. It's a little bit shorter. So it's almost like we want to draw like a messy chevron. So we want these little V shapes, but we want them nested together. And ideally we don't want them with a gap in between them. We want them sort of all blurring into one. So that's what I'm doing. So you could go all the way up with one direction and then come back down in the other. But actually, if we go up in both directions, we just sort of alternate as we go. We get that nice tapered edge on both sides. So for this ear in particular, it's got nice fluffy side of that fur there. Got a couple of layers in now on that side, and then I'll come down around the other side down here, and this time I've got more sort of cup shapes or softer V's like C on its balancing. And what we don't want to do again is to take our time and do this really carefully with hard pressure. We don't want them all lining up. We want to sort of get them roughly in the right shape. So I'd have a little bit of a practice of sort of doing that sort of curved shape. So we're coming down here, little curved shape. It doesn't matter if it goes a little bit awry. Coming down, it all adds to the realism of it. So what you would do if this was a full colour piece is then you'd swap to, say, a buff titanium or an ivory or warm grey 1, warm grey 2. So you just take it up a notch. So instead of jumping to the mid-tone, you'd have something sort of in between, an in-betweeny colour. We've not got that mid-tone, so I'm just doing really light pressure, softening that off a little bit with this mid-tone, with this Miles Violet. Then in the ear itself, so we've got the skin that we're sort of working on here. I'm trying to do quite a soft sweeping motion with a flat pencil, covering a lot of the ear at once. Another way to do it would be sort of round and round strokes. So we're swapping the way in which we're doing it here. What I quite like with this sort of sweeping motion is I can flick it into that fur there and it sort of tapers off as well. I've got that ridge, sort of fold in that ear that I want to bring in. You see how shallow my white is there? Just a little glaze of white. Come down. This is a really useful exercise. These kinds of variation in strokes is really good for those initial stages of any drawing to sort of map in those values. So actually we've got a really nice range of values here, apart from the dark bit of the ear canal. So I'll just pop that bit in there. We've not gone the full range at the moment, but relatively we've still got the shape coming through. We can increase the realism by increasing the contrast. So we could bring in then some of the darker colours. So again, with this exercise, we're just going to skip straight to the black. And I'm going to just flick out into that fur. I consider this area that is all black as sort of a zone of safety. So I'm quite happy to sort of sit around here. I can rest my pencil here. And then I'm just sort of flicking into that fur. We don't necessarily need to put black everywhere, but we certainly need a darker colour in this entrance to the ear canal here. And then it's just a case of building up then some of the fur and the rest of this ear. So for this now, what I'm doing is more of a sort of soft fade. So instead of drawing the individual fur, I'm just gently, you can see how I'm holding my pencil, gently sort of flicking it in. It doesn't matter if it sort of overlaps some of the white. What that's going to do is knock the white back ever so slightly and give us effectively another colour. And then I could come back in with some of my white if I wanted. And I'm just sort of blending now those colours together, almost creating another colour. I've lost some of the definition in my whites. So I'm put my pencil on at a higher angle, and I'm just going to flick in some of those white bits as well. I could do a few wiggly bits as well if I wanted to in there. And then we're just looking for little interesting shapes to pick out, just to deepen that fur. So I'm not drawing the fur anymore, I'm drawing the shadows or the fur behind the fur. I'm doing a little bit of a soft fade into there. Just building up the depth. Don't be afraid to rotate back through the colours and just sort of fade those out a little bit and soften those edges a little. And then for the detailed bits, for the really, to add the depth in, I'm thinking about little tiny V's or little dart shapes, or even little lines and dots, just to suggest a bit deeper fur in certain places. And then I could go back to this ear canal and darken this off a little bit. And then it's just a case of them rotating through those colours, softening off any edges that need softening, providing a bit more definition, altering those values. And then if you were using lots of other colours, this is the point where you start bringing in lots of other colours. Maybe you could see some orangey browns or other colours sort of coming into this fur, and you'd start adding those in. But I think sometimes it's nice to reflect on how your pencil's moving. So I'm doing the skin here, you see I'm going round and round, roundy strokes as I come down the ear. Remember those more of a stubbly sort of little V shapes. If I want to soften everything together, again, come back and do that sort of wide oval. If I was on a really grainy paper and I wanted to fill the tooth in, I'd probably do smaller circles. But as it is, I'm on, it's got a little bit of a drag with it, but it's relatively smooth, so you can fade all of that back. So this exercise is really helpful for just thinking about how we might build that depth and loosening up to develop that texture. So yeah, some things to think about, different ways of drawing some of that fur. So I think my key points would be to think about putting in some of that individual fur, some of those highlights in first. With colour pencils, generally we assume you're working light to dark. You can do little flicks of details and things with white on at the end, so I could come over and I could do a few little flicks, but it doesn't always produce a smooth white. Sometimes it gives you a bit of a blended white, but if you want to really keep those highlights bright, then they go in first. Then thinking about a bit of a soft fade on top, and then some final details. We're thinking about not having uniform parallel strokes. We're thinking about wonky and sort of flowing strokes with tapered edges, maybe some sort of sketchy chevron shapes coming up the side of the ear here, and then maybe these sort of cup shapes coming down. You see they vary in size as well.